Okay, hello, year 13. I hope we're all right and had a good Christmas and New Year. Um, so look, what we're going to do is, I know we're kind of in a weird situation because we were basically finished with Zen Buddhism, but we had another couple of things, just one thing to tie up at the end. Um, then we had started to do stuff about gender and Buddhism, and I gave you all that stuff to do over Christmas about gender and particularly about the place of female renunciants and nuns in the Buddhist tradition. But basically, to finish the last bit on Zen and to talk about essays on Zen and to move on gender, I really would rather we were all in the classroom for those lessons because it's really just a question of putting things into essays and essay structures and stuff like that. And I think it works better if everyone's there. Look, if there gets to be a situation where um, we're not at school for longer, which I don't think will be the case, and I hope isn't the case. But if we're off school for longer, then I will then go back and do some stuff on gender and Zen online. But what I'm going to do to start with, what I'm going to do now is go on to the next unit. So gender is quite a short unit, that's the point. And we really just need to, once you've done that work that I set you at home, to kind of go over putting that into essays. So the next unit after that will be socially engaged Buddhism, and this is quite another very short unit. This is our penultimate unit. There's one more unit of Buddhism after that, which is Buddhism in the West. So socially engaged Buddhism. So what we're going to do in this for this week is we're going to start looking at the first couple of lessons of socially engaged Buddhism. Um, there's only really four lessons, whether those are single or double, and I'm not sure. But there's only really four things to look at. There's the first, which we're going to do now, which is the introduction to what is socially engaged Buddhism and is it authentically Buddhist. We're going to look at an example of a socially engaged Buddhist organization. Um, the organization run by someone called Dr. Ambedkar. And then we're going to look at two issues in socially engaged Buddhism, that is the environment and war. So for this lesson, basically we're going to look at what socially engaged Buddhism is, and you probably should know something about it already. It's basically Buddhism which gets involved in trying to make a difference in the world. In other words, Buddhism that tries to not only interested in nirvana, but interested in making the world a better place for other people. And we're going to look at whether this thing, socially engaged Buddhism, is authentically Buddhist. In other words, does it go back to the teachings of the Buddha? Because if you think about it, Buddhism is often presented, the original teachings of the Buddha is often presented as something that's nothing to do with really changing the world. It's more about changing your own mind and making it so that you can be at peace with the world, even though it's full of suffering. So a lot of people have kind of thought, well, Buddha didn't really care about making the world a better place. The Buddha really cared about our personal experience and like trying to overcome our personal suffering. But we're going to look at whether that was true, and does that mean that socially engaged Buddhism is not authentically Buddhist, and so on and so on. So the things you're going to need for this lesson are, I'm going to put up a copy of some of these slides, the first few slides, because I'm just going to talk through those slides, and if you can print them out, that's great. If not, you can just take some notes on them. If you do print them out, you might want to annotate as we go through, just so that you know if there's anything you need to add. That's the first bit. Then in order to look at whether socially engaged Buddhism is new or old, we're going to look at a reading, which I'm going to put on here on Teams. It should be there, called Socially Engaged Buddhism, New or Old. We are also going to need a reading called Thich Nhat Hanh's 14 Precepts. That's a reading that will help us to define socially engaged Buddhism, because it's Thich Nhat Hanh is the first person to use that term, socially engaged Buddhism. Okay. So first slide is about what socially engaged Buddhism is. So engaged Buddhism, sometimes called socially engaged Buddhism, so you get both names. Sometimes it's just called engaged, sometimes socially engaged. Refers to forms of Buddhism which aim to apply the Buddhist teachings to situations of social, political, environmental, and economic suffering. So look at this, focusing on that: social, political, environmental, and economic. So in other words, it's not just about personal suffering and your personal experience of nirvana, but society, politics, helping the environment, economic situations, in other words, helping the poorest people in society. The idea of socially engaged Buddhism is that Buddhism should not be exclusively concerned with personal awakening, i.e. nirvana, but should also be interested in solving worldly forms of suffering, so everyday suffering. The term was first used by the Vietnamese Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who we've seen a couple of times talking about emptiness and talking about Pure Land. In 1966, he founded the Order of Interbeing, a Buddhist community of monastics and lay people, so it combines monks and lay people. This order follows a list of 14 precepts written by Thich Nhat Hanh. They form the basis of his vision of engaged Buddhism. So basically, he started this organization, the Order of Interbeing, and the idea of the Order of Interbeing is that, you know, people, if they're monks, they can still stay being monks. They're still part of the monastic sangha. If they're lay people, they're still lay Buddhists. So it's not like instead of being a monk or a lay person joining this order, it's a kind of extra thing. And the idea is that monks and lay people who belong to it have a particular vision of what Buddhism is all about. So what I want you to do is just, before you move on, you might want to pause this and have a look at Thich Nhat Hanh's list of 14 precepts or 14 rules. And I just want you to see if you could highlight in there any rules which are particularly about engaging with social or political problems. So what about these 14 rules show that Thich Nhat Hanh and the Order of Interbeing was not just interested in enlightenment, but interested in social and political change? So have a read through. I'm just going to read them through here. You might want to pause the video, but when you've unpaused, I'm just going to read through some of the ones that I think are most important. Okay, so I'm just going to pick out a few of these that I thought were important. So if you look at number 4, it says, do not avoid contact with suffering or close your eyes before suffering. Now, what's interesting about that to me is that, you know, sometimes Buddhism is portrayed as what you might call a world rejecting religion. In other words, a religion of people who want to kind of cut themselves off from the world, become a monk, go and live in the forest somewhere and kind of not get involved in the suffering of the world, just focus on their enlightenment. But here he's saying, do not avoid contact with suffering or close your eye before suffering. So in other words, be aware of the suffering that's out there in the world, and, you know, and part of that is go and try and make a difference and change that suffering. Don't ignore all that suffering that's going on in the world. Number 5, you can see, do not accumulate wealth while millions go hungry. So, you know, yes, Buddhism has traditionally been against you know, craving of wealth, but there's an emphasis here on don't accumulate wealth while millions are hungry. So it's emphasizing you should be thinking about other people as well. So again, it's about making a difference in the world. That's number 5. If you go down to number 11, do not live with a vocation that is harmful to humans and nature. Well, that would be quite a standard part of Buddhism, because that's right livelihood, right? Do not have a harmful job. Basically, a vocation is a job. But then it goes on, do not invest in companies that deprive others of their chance to live. So it's going from just, well, you yourself shouldn't have a job that's bad, to stretching it a little bit more to saying to Buddhists, well, you shouldn't really be investing. If you're making money by having shares or some kind of financial interest in a company that is harming others in the world, then that's a bad thing too. So it just makes it a bit less just about your everyday life, you know, don't be a butcher or sell alcohol or whatever, to a bit more broadly to say we should think about other people in society. If you look at number 12, do not kill, but then it says, do not let others kill, find whatever means possible to protect life and prevent war. So again, I think that one's interesting, because do not kill. Well, it's easy for a Buddhist monk to say, well, I don't kill, I'm just going to separate myself from the world, I'll live a peaceful life. But it broadens it out and says, well, we should prevent war, we should protect life. So from that point of view, it probably wouldn't be enough to just go into a cave and meditate. You should get out of that cave and go and protest against violence and injustice around the world. That kind of stuff. Number 13, possess nothing that should belong to others. Well, that's pretty standard. That's one of the 5 precepts. Don't take what is not given to you. Respect the property of others. Then it says, but prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on earth. So it's kind of saying, yes, we should you shouldn't take things from people, you shouldn't steal, you should respect other people's property, but at the same time, there are some situations in which you can take action against other people. So if others are profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on Earth, then that's a bad thing. So if you think something like, say, protesters who go and make some protest against a company. If some company is behaving in a terrible way, perhaps like exploiting people in the third world. Now, if you just believed in not in respecting the property of others, then you might say, well, they own these factories, they have these farms in the third world or whatever. We should respect their rights to have those things. But what Thich Nhat Hanh is saying is, you should respect the property of others, but at the same time, if people are using what they have, their resources, to exploit other people, then perhaps we should be doing something against that. So the whole move in Thich Nhat Hanh's 14 precepts is to say, yes, all the things that Buddhism has traditionally said about getting over suffering and not harming others and all that kind of stuff is good, but there should also be a step that you take beyond that, which is not just about your own enlightenment, but about helping people more broadly in the world. I hope that makes sense. Send me a message if that doesn't make sense. Okay, different kinds of socially engaged Buddhism. There's different ways to look at socially engaged Buddhism. There's different forms of socially engaged Buddhism in the world. There's lots of different socially engaged Buddhist groups and organizations. So to understand the differences here, we can make some distinctions. So number one, social activism as connected with meditation and personal spiritual development, or as a separate path. So in other words, if we're saying Buddhism's not just to do with personal spiritual development, that means getting to nirvana. If it's not just that, are we saying socially engaged Buddhism is something completely different to that? Is socially engaged Buddhism like a completely separate part of Buddhism, or are the two things combined? Well, let's have a look. So it says, for some engaged Buddhists, this form of Buddhism, i.e. socially engaged Buddhism, goes hand in hand with personal spiritual development. For example, Thich Nhat Hanh believes that Buddhists should focus on meditation, mindfulness, and political action. And that's pretty clear if you read through his 14 precepts, that he's interested in personal spiritual development and at the same time taking political action. So people should be both active, both trying to get to enlightenment and trying to help other people in society. Others see engaged Buddhism as purely about social action. For example, the Indian reformer Dr. Ambedkar, who we're going to look at in the next lesson, saw Buddhism in mainly political terms and gave very little emphasis to nirvana. So Ambedkar kind of just completely switched Buddhism from being something that's about nirvana to being something that's mainly about political and social change. So that's one form of distinction. You've got ones that think it's about meditation, enlightenment, and social change, and those that think it's just about social change. Now, the Western, going back to the slide, the Western Buddhist Ken Jones, who wrote about this stuff, makes a distinction between soft engaged Buddhism, which he says is like the idea that it emphasizes the need for individuals to apply the qualities learned in meditation to their social and political life, and hard engaged Buddhism, which focuses more on transforming society. So the difference here would be soft engaged Buddhism would be the idea that yes, Buddhism is about meditation, it's about personal journey towards nirvana. However, as part of that journey towards nirvana, it should involve becoming more full of metta and kindness and karuna, compassion. So soft engaged Buddhists would say, well, if you're becoming more full of karuna and metta, then that should be reflected in your actions. In other words, you should be doing more stuff like giving to charity, helping out a local homeless shelter, just being kinder and more aware of the suffering of others in your life. That's soft engaged Buddhism. So for what he's saying there is the focus there is meditation and get to nirvana, but you should also see the social and political aspects of that. Hard engaged Buddhism is much more about transforming society, so not so interested in personal awakening and personal spiritual development, and also not the changes that hard socially engaged Buddhism wants to see in society are more dramatic. So it might say, well, instead of just giving to charity, we need a fundamental political change in society to make things more equal for the poorest people. Instead of kind of doing more recycling to help the environment, we need a complete change in the energy policy of government so that there's a more sustainable future for the planet. That's the difference between soft and hard engaged Buddhism. So uh, you can see some differences there. Another way of thinking about socially engaged Buddhism is the difference between Buddhism with a capital B and Buddhism with a small b. This difference is made by a Thai Buddhist activist called Sulak Sivaraksa. So the Thai Buddhist activist Sulak Sivaraksa makes a contrast between what he calls capital B Buddhism, or capital B Buddhists, and small b Buddhists. Capital B Buddhism refers to Buddhism which is associated with state power, with ritual and ceremony, with questions of ethnic or national identity. Small b Buddhism is associated with non-governmental organisations, with influencing power, those in power rather than directly wielding power, and with Buddhist ethical principles rather than with ritual, myth, and Buddhism as a source of ethno-religious identity. The term engaged Buddhism is more often used to refer to small b Buddhism. However, capital B Buddhists have been very influential in many Buddhist countries in recent years. For example, in Sri Lanka, monks have stood in parliament with the aim of protecting the Buddhist identity of the country. So what's this all about, capital B and small b Buddhist? It's quite a tricky concept to get your head around because obviously we don't live in a Buddhist country and understand what that means. But one way you might see it is that, if you look at, you don't see it so much in this country, but if you look at political parties in this country who are concerned with national identity, to do with like very keen sense of being British and upholding a British identity, they will sometimes link that with Christianity in some cases. So you'll see it sometimes in, for example, UKIP, those kind of political parties who are very keen on national identity. They will sometimes talk about this being a Christian country and having to stand up for the rights of Christian people and all those kind of things. It can be seen as a very dodgy thing because sometimes there's some not so nice undertones of the way that people use that kind of language. But the basic idea is there in this country that people link sometimes Christianity with nationalist identity, with being British and being Christian going hand in hand. And sometimes that happens in Buddhist countries too. You get political parties who want to kind of say this is a Buddhist country for Buddhist people, and we want to make sure that Buddhism is a really important part of the identity of the country. A country like Sri Lanka, which is probably the country I know Buddhist country I know best, and so I have most to say about there, that's really clear. Especially because Buddhism, you've got to think back that Sri Lanka was once a part of the British Empire, so it was a colonialised country, and when it was part of the British Empire, Buddhism, was effectively a second-class religion compared to Christianity, the religion of the colonial powers. And in that situation, Buddhists began to see, oh, well, our identity, the Buddhist identity of our country is under threat. So it's not really surprising that when Sri Lanka gained its independence in, I think, 1948, after that time, there was a big emphasis on making the country more Buddhist. And the way that will be done will be building Buddhist statues and Buddhist temples, putting statues of Buddha very clearly in public places so people can see as they walk around the country, this is a country with a Buddhist identity. Now, what Sulak Sivaraksa is saying, he's saying there's a big difference between socially engaged Buddhism, which is where the idea is to kind of get Buddhism to be the dominant religious religion in the country and kind of establish that this is a Buddhist country and stand up for the rights of Buddhist people. That's very different to what he calls small b Buddhism. For small b Buddhism, he would be talking about Buddhists who are interested in making a social change, but who don't really care about, Buddhists first or this is a Buddhist country. What they care about is putting principles of Buddhist Buddhist principles like karuna and metta into practice. So in other words, acting in a more loving and kind way towards people. Again, if you make the comparison to this country, so some people like I mentioned that the political party UKIP. So a political party like UKIP, if a member of UKIP was to say, well, this is a Christian country, that would be associated with the idea that this country should be doing more for for Christian people in the country, and as a result, it might be mixed in with a kind of anti-immigration kind of message with that party. The idea that this is a Christian country for Christian people, all that kind of thing, right? That would be the equivalent of a capital B Buddhism, to say, well, this is a Buddhist country, we could stand up for the rights of Buddhist people. On the other hand, there's many organisations in this country. So when I used to live in London, I used to be involved with an organisation called the Catholic Worker, and the Catholic Worker is an organisation that tries to put Christian principles into practice, but not in a way that is saying, well, this is a Christian country for Christian people, but more in a way of saying, well, but what are the principles of Christianity? Well, the principles of Christianity are love your neighbour as yourself, and that your neighbour includes all people of all religions. And in that context, the message of an organisation like the Catholic Worker would be very much for the rights of immigrants, that people as Christians, putting Christian principles into practice, should mean welcoming strangers, welcoming refugees who have no place to go, no matter what their religion or their faith. But it's more important is, are we treating them in a Christian way, not are we standing up for the rights of Christian people? I hope that makes sense. I don't know if I've explained that very clearly, but I guess the idea is capital B Buddhism is we want to stand up for the rights of Buddhist people, and small B Buddhism is we want to put the put the principles of Buddhism into action, and in doing so help all people in society. Kind of rambled a bit there, sorry. I don't know, I skipped a slide there by accident. So look, we've looked at different kinds of socially engaged Buddhism, but the big question is socially engaged Buddhism new or old? In other words, is it a new development in Buddhism that's not part of the Buddha's original teachings, or is it something that's long been part of Buddhism, just a continuation of something that was already there? I would say, as we go through, most scholars today view the socially engaged Buddhism as something in many ways new, as something that's a new thing in Buddhism. Whether they're right or not, it is a debatable thing. There's quite a lot of debate to be had here, but we're going to go through some stuff. So what I want you to do is have a look at the reading, Socially Engaged Buddhism, New or Old, and I'm actually just going to read this through with you. I want you to have highlighters, two highlighters. Anything that says Socially Engaged Buddhism is old, highlight in one colour. Anything that says it's new, highlight in a different colour. So yeah, that's how we're going to do it. So I'm just going to read this out loud. If you don't want, you could just do this on your own and just skip me reading it out loud. But I thought I'd go through it in case there's any extra comments that I want to make as I go through. So it starts with a section on Walpola Rahula, famous Sri Lankan monk who we've talked about in the past. So Walpola Rahula is a well-known Sri Lankan monk and scholar. Has argued that social and political engagement has always been a vital part of Buddhism. So he's saying it's old. In fact, he goes far as to say that Buddhism is based on service to others. So that, again, good quote to put in to highlight. It's old. He's saying the fundamental basis of Buddhism is service to others, helping others. It's not just about your own enlightenment. In 1946, Rahula wrote The Heritage of the Bhikkhu, which is aimed to show that Buddhist monks had, from the Buddha's times and throughout Sri Lankan history, been vitally engaged in social service. He's focusing on monks and saying actually monks have always had a role to play in society. They haven't always been people who separate themselves from society and just try to get to enlightenment. Rahula begins by looking at the Pali Canon and showing that the Buddha often spent his time giving practical advice to lay people about things such as the link between crime and poverty, the importance of creating employment opportunities for all people, the need for merchants to be honest and hardworking, and the need for lay people in general to be free from debt and to take care of their health. Rahula concludes that the Buddha was interested in the social well-being of society and not simply with the personal path to nirvana. So there's some evidence that the Buddhism always had some interest in society and making society a better place. Rahula goes on to note that throughout its history in Sri Lanka, Buddhism has been strongly connected with the political ruling of the country, with monks serving as education ministers, doctors, judges, architects, and even military advisors. So here's some evidence both from the Pali Canon and from Sri Lankan history that Buddhists have always been involved in society. However, Rahula's view of Buddhism has been challenged. While the Pali Canon does contain some advice on worldly matters, many scholars question the idea that the Buddha was first and foremost concerned with political and social issues. For example, Richard Gombrich says of the Buddha, his concern was to reform individuals and help them to leave society forever, not to reform the world. He never preached against social inequality, only declared its irrelevance to salvation. He neither tried to abolish the caste system nor to do away with slavery. So Richard Gombrich is kind of emphasising, so here's this idea that it's actually new. This would be saying that social engaged Buddhism is new, because he's basically saying, yeah, maybe the Buddha gave some advice, like small bits of advice about, like, be hardworking and honest, and don't get into debt. It's kind of small things, but he wasn't really interested in changing society in any big way. He didn't preach against, even though he didn't think caste was important from a religious point of view. He never tried to get rid of the caste system or tell people to do it. There were slaves in the Buddha's time. He never tried to get rid of slaves. So Gombrich says the Buddha was not interested in changing society. The historian Bardwell Smith expresses a similar view of traditional Buddhism as a whole. He says, the primary goal of traditional Buddhism is not a stable order or a just society, but the discovery of genuine freedom or awakening by each person. It has never been asserted that the conditions of society are unimportant or unrelated to this more important goal, but it is critical to stress the distinction between what is primary and what is not. Even the vocation of the Bodhisattva is not as a social reformer, but as the catalyst to personal transformation within society. So he's kind of saying, look, yes, there is a link between having a good society and being able to get to enlightenment. If society is a terrible place that's full of war and terrible suffering, it's very difficult to get to enlightenment. And it's true that, especially in Mahayana Buddhism, there's this idea that the Bodhisattva should go around helping other people. But none of that is really about changing society in any big way. Bodhisattvas, their aim is to help other people, but not help other people like a social reformer, but to help other people to get to enlightenment. The most important thing in Buddhism, Bardwell Smith is saying, is enlightenment, not any kind of social reform. Back to the reading. In addition, Christopher Queen, and he's someone we're going to look at more, he's written a lot about socially engaged Buddhism, has argued that the kind of political engagement which Rahula describes in Sri Lankan history is an example of capital B Buddhism. Buddhism supporting and working for the state, not the small b Buddhism which is characteristic of contemporary engaged Buddhist movements. So yeah, this is quite an important point, is that usually when people talk about engaged Buddhism, they're talking about what we've called small b Buddhism. Buddhism that tries to kind of create some sort of change in society, that is a criticism of the society it's part of, that kind of challenges the power of rulers. Whereas all the things that Rahula is talking about are times when Buddhism has just been part of that ruling power, has just played a role in that ruling power. So it's perhaps, even if there was socially engaged Buddhism in the past, it perhaps wasn't the sort of socially engaged Buddhism we generally talk about today. Okay, next section is called Buddhist Principles. So all that stuff, Bardwell Smith, Christopher Queen, Gombrich, that's all things that would suggest that socially engaged Buddhism as we see it today is actually new. So Buddhist principles. Another way of arguing that Buddhism has always been socially engaged is by pointing out that many Buddhist values and principles lend themselves towards social engagement. Buddhism values metta, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion. An enlightened being is supposed to have perfected these qualities. Surely these qualities naturally lead themselves towards social engagement. Wouldn't a perfectly compassionate being naturally become politically and socially engaged if he or she saw great suffering in the world? So this is partly where you could say it's old. Yes, the Buddha definitely emphasised metta and karuna. Surely there's a natural link between those things and being socially engaged. If we turn over the page. However, the problem with this view is that often in Buddhist history, the emphasis has been more on compassion and kindness in theory rather than in practice. Monks were expected to cultivate these qualities in their minds, but not necessarily put them into practice in the social and political world. So this is the idea, is that yes, in theory it's important to have compassion and metta, but it's not, in the past it wasn't always emphasised that we could actually do anything with those qualities. Christopher Queen's discussion of 4 kinds of Buddhist ethics can help us to see the issues here more clearly. Queen suggests that 4 different styles of Buddhist ethics can be identified: discipline, virtue, altruism, and engagement. In this way, Queen shows that ethics are central to all forms of Buddhism, but this concern with ethics does not always result in engaged Buddhism of the kind found today. So basically, he's saying that as time has gone on, Buddhism has developed the way it thinks about ethics over time. And I think this point that Queen makes here is really important, because it really helps us to get a kind of nuanced idea of this idea that socially engaged Buddhism draws on Buddhist values from the past, but it kind of applies them in a different way. So let's go through his 4 stages. The first one is discipline. This refers to ethics that are concerned with avoiding certain forms of conduct which are associated with greed, hatred, and delusion. E.g., the 5 precepts will be an example of this kind of thing, discipline, because the 5 precepts are all about not doing certain bad things. The focus here is on the individual, training the individual through avoiding negative acts. But of course, these ethics do have some implications for society too. So look, the key thing here is that the 5 precepts, or these things of discipline, are about not doing bad things. So, not harming others, not attacking others, about not stealing things, about not doing jobs that are unethical. However, the obviously that has some implications for society. If you're not killing people, you're in a way being socially good. If you don't steal, you're being socially good. But it's not a really active involvement in changing the world in a better way. It's just making sure that you are not doing anything wrong. Next level, virtue. The focus moves here from avoiding negative acts to embracing positive acts and states of mind, developing compassion, and so on. The practitioner tries to develop certain virtues within themselves. Here, thinking of others comes more into view, although the stress is still on an individual character development rather than on helping others as a primary objective. So look, in discipline, you're just thinking of you not doing bad things. In the stage of virtue, which again is still found in the Pali Canon, we're talking things like metta and karuna here are virtues. The idea is developing good qualities of mind. You think you want to help others. You feel sorry for others who are suffering. You feel a goodwill towards other people. Now this helps. This is moving us more beyond just like yourself not doing bad things, more towards helping other people. If you have feelings of metta or karuna, loving kindness and compassion, you're more likely to help others. However, still at this stage, virtue, it's still more about how you feel than what you do. There's not a great emphasis on actually doing anything because of your metta. There's more an emphasis on just having that state of mind. The next level is altruism, and this is something that Queen says is found particularly in Mahayana Buddhism. Altruism. Here, helping others becomes the central concern. Stress is put not merely on cultivating virtue for its own sake, but on actively working to help others. Queen associates this style of ethics particularly with Mahayana Buddhism, quoting the Mahayana author Atisha, who recommended practices such as nursing the sick, helping the poor and hungry, and the homeless, and so on. So here we get a definite move towards doing good stuff. You had discipline, avoiding bad stuff; virtue, cultivating good feelings and emotions towards others; and then in Mahayana Buddhism, says Queen, you get this emphasis on actually doing stuff, altruism, helping other people, helping the sick, helping the poor, helping the hungry, helping the homeless. Now that level, yes, you've started to make a difference in society, but still it's not really about transforming society. It's about kind of making sure that life is not too bad for those people who are badly affected. So, so this would be the level of like, this is like giving to charity is altruism. But it's not the same as kind of wanting to change society so society becomes more equal. That's a different thing to altruism. So next is engagement. Queen argues that while the first 3 styles of ethics are all productive of a better society, they differ from the ethics of engagement because engagement is concerned with the transformation of social institutions and relationships. In other words, with influencing society in a radical way, rather than simply with helping those in need in a more straightforward way. Clearly, political activism and aiming at the transformation of society goes beyond the ethics of simply helping those in need in a more immediate way. So, this would be the difference between, say, someone who believes that, yes, it's terrible that there are people who are poor in society, let's give money to charities and to food banks to feed those people. And then other people who think that actually what we need is a transformation of society, so there's not such inequalities between rich people and poor people. It always makes me think of, when I was growing up, I had a friend and his parents were very, very left-wing people, big Labour Party supporters. And when we were young, there was this event called Live Aid that you've probably all heard of, where there was a famine in Africa and in parts of Africa, and they raised money through a concert and through a music record, the song, what's it called? Let Them Know It's Christmas Time, that song. They raised money and sent it out there to help people who were struggling in the third world, to feed people. Now, when Live Aid was on, I remember that my friend told me that he wanted to donate some of his pocket money, he was only a little kid at the time, to that cause, because he thought, he saw how people were suffering. But his mum said no, she thought it was wrong to give money to that. And the point is, the reason she thought it was wrong is because she thought, well, actually, by giving to charities in this way, you're almost accepting that this inequality is part of society. Whereas what should really happen is that we should see a change in the way that society is, a change in the imbalance between, say, rich countries in the West and poor countries in Africa, which means that we don't have a situation where poor countries get into this situation where people are dying of lack of food. So that would be the difference between altruism, which would be the giving to charity side of things, and engagement, which is trying to transform society. It's between like small and individual acts of giving and a radical transformation of society. So let's have a look what it says there. Still, looking at the 4 styles of ethics noted by Queens helps to show that we cannot make an absolute divide between modern engaged Buddhism and pre-modern non-engaged Buddhism. Ethics have always been central to Buddhism, and often this has led to compassionate engagement with the world. It is difficult to draw an exact line between this and contemporary engaged Buddhism. So that's why I like what Christopher Queen's got to say, because he shows that actually engaged Buddhism is something new, but also something that draws on things that are old. There's always been these things about caring for other people and helping other people, and they've gradually grown as a part of Buddhism, but maybe socially engaged Buddhism is new in that it pushes the whole thing a bit further than has been pushed before. Hope that makes sense. Okay, last part, Western influence. Some scholars argue that the origins of contemporary engaged Buddhism lie in the meeting of Buddhism with certain aspects of Western thought, which stressed activism, social justice, human rights, and so on. Christopher Queen notes how some of the most significant figures in the establishment of modern Asian engaged Buddhism were educated in English-speaking Western-oriented schools and universities. He thus argues that engaged Buddhism came about as part of the project of Buddhist modernism. That's something we'll talk about in a future lesson, in which Buddhism was reinterpreted under the influence of Western thought. Thus, from this perspective, engaged Buddhism emerged in conjunction with a number of other modernist ideas about the nature of Buddhism, such as a playing down of ritual and merit-making, and an emphasis on Buddhism as a philosophy rather than a matter of faith. All of these trends within Buddhist modernism clearly tie in well to the ideals of engaged Buddhism. Queen argues that engaged Buddhism as we know it today did not appear till about 1880. So this is something, when we look at Buddhism in the West, we'll see that, there's a big argument amongst scholars that says actually Buddhism was transformed during the colonial period when Buddhism came into contact with Western thought, and people started to kind of transform parts of Buddhism in light of these Western ideas. And one of those ideas, part of those ideas would be that in the West there has been a big emphasis that religion should be something that is concerned with making a change in the world. That's been a part of Western Christianity for many hundreds of years. And so the idea is that Buddhism kind of was influenced by that part of Western Christianity, that Buddhist thinkers in Asia, affected by the kind of Western colonial culture they were surrounded by and the schools they grew up in, took on board that idea that, well, religious people like priests and vicars and stuff should be out there making a difference in the world, making the world a better place. You can see that in the Western tradition, people like Martin Luther King and people like that who were, hugely involved in politics. Somehow that idea has become part of Buddhism, and that leads Christopher Queen to say, well, yeah, okay, Buddhism had some ethical ideas that were important before, but it was only when it come into contact with the Western world and with Western ideas about religion that the idea that Buddhism should be really very interested in social change came about. Going back to the reading, however, we must be cautious here. As we have seen, some of the ideals lying behind engaged Buddhism, such as compassion and altruism, certainly existed in pre-modern Buddhism. It has been argued that Western understandings of traditional Buddhism have been over-influenced by the sociologist Max Weber, who described Buddhism as a world-rejecting religion. While early Buddhism may not have been fully socially engaged, Weber's description goes too far and may have led to an overestimation of the extent to which Buddhism has been transformed by contact with the West. So this takes a little bit of explaining. So Max Weber is a sociologist. I don't think anyone does sociology. I can never remember if anyone in this class does sociology. I don't think so. But like in sociology, Max Weber is a huge name, and Max Weber studied religion, and he put the different world religions into different groups, and he defined Buddhism as a world-rejecting religion. That means Max Weber said that Buddhism is a religion that doesn't care about the world very much, and basically only cares about nirvana and getting to nirvana. So it's basically a religion for people who want to go off into a cave and meditate till they get to nirvana and don't care about the world at all. Now the idea is that what could have happened is that people went in to study Buddhism in Asia with that in their mind, Buddhism is a world-rejecting religion. And then when they see Buddhists out there getting involved in society, they start to think, oh, that must be that can't be a Buddhist thing because Max Weber said Buddhism is world rejecting, and therefore when we see Buddhists getting involved in the world, that must be as a result of Western influence. They must have been influenced by Western religious ideas, particularly ideas of Protestantism, which say that religious people should be out there making a difference in the world, and that must be why Buddhists are doing that. The problem being, though, that while there may be something in that, it seems that has been overestimated because perhaps Weber was not right. Perhaps Weber stereotyped Buddhism by saying it was world rejecting. And although Buddhism does have an aspect which says, forget about the world, just get to nirvana, it also does have aspects that suggest that making the world a better place is a good thing. Well, I'm really rambling. This is a long video. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so look, here's a couple of tasks I want you to do. I want you to try and see if you can do a bit of writing just to get these ideas down on some paper in a bit more of a concise way than either the reading or my rambling talking today. So I want you to just basically see if you can complete these sentence starters. Is engaged Buddhism authentically Buddhist? Walpole's Rahula thinks, yes, it is. And then tell me why. You've got to talk about the Pali Canon, summarize what he says about the Pali Canon. He says that the Buddha gave advice to people. Tell me some of the advice he gave. And talk about what he says about Sri Lankan history. What role has Buddhism played in society in the history of Sri Lanka? Then for the next bit, he can be criticised because, well, give me the criticisms. Two sides of criticism you want. You want either, the criticism that says, well, the Buddha wasn't really interested in making social difference. So what you either want Gombrich or Bardwell Smith. It'd be good to include a bit of a condensed quote in there. And then you also want the Christopher Queen's criticism about, well, what Rahula is talking about is not actually this small b socially engaged Buddhism that we usually talk about today. Next, I want so that's that first section on Rahula. Then I want a bit of a summary of what Christopher Queen says. And so Christopher Queen identified 4 kinds of Buddhist ethics. They are: explain briefly what those kind of ethics are. Look, you're not going to write everything in the exam, but I just want you to make sure you can say what those 4 things are, and in your writing show the development. Discipline is about making sure that you avoid bad actions. Virtue is making sure that you have a positive mindset towards other people, like a loving mindset towards other people, but not necessarily doesn't involve doing anything about it. Altruism means, actually making a difference in the world, but perhaps in quite a small way, certainly not transforming society. And then engage Buddhism. Then I want you to say, what does that make him think about the question, is Engaged Buddhism authentically Buddhist? And you want to have that nuance in there, that idea that he thinks it's new. In fact, he doesn't think that Engaged Buddhism emerged till 1880, but he also thinks it drew on things that were there already in the Buddhist tradition. Hope that makes sense. So I want you to just complete that. That's the first task, and I've got one more task for you to do. Okay, this is what would have been a homework task, but I just want you to do like a little bit of research. It doesn't want to be huge, this piece of research, so just a small thing. I want you to find out about these two socially engaged Buddhist organizations, the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and an organization called Savodaya. I want you to tell me a little bit about their history, and really this doesn't want to be huge. So history, where, when, and how did they begin? So where are they from? Who started them? When did they start? That kind of thing. But look, I'm not talking about a lot, a small thing. B, what do they do? What kind of work are they involved in? And give, if you can, give a couple of examples. So again, I don't want page after page. I want a short paragraph saying this is the kind of things they do. Here's a couple of examples of things they might do. See if you can, how is their work connected to Buddhist teachings? If you can find their websites, there might have some websites out there, that'd be good so you can see, well, do they say anything? Do they link it to particular Buddhist teachings? Do they say, well, that we do this because the Buddha taught this? Or can you make a link? Can you see reasons why a Buddhist might support these two organizations? Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for listening to a very long video.